In this training guide, you're going to be learning the entire process we use to refurbish an iPhone XR or 11. We're using an iPhone 11 in this video, however the process is exactly the same for an iPhone XR. We've made this training guide as an aid for repairers who've ideally had some in-person training and want to use these guides as a reference or reminder of their training. Refurbishment isn't difficult once you know what you're doing. However, there's only so much we can show in a video guide. A lot of the learning process is done through trial and error from practicing, which is why we suggest in-person training to get you up and running before attempting refurbishment. If you are looking to get into iPhone refurbishment and don't know where to start, we offer a variety of professional refurbishment courses to get your business up and running, all of which are linked in the description below. If you are following along, you're going to need all the right tools. The tools we're using in this guide are a heated vacuum plate, we're using the Ford FW360 machine, a silicone match tape for the iPhone XR and 11, an eye test box with the relevant tester flex cable, ordinary pliers or side cutters, heat-proof gloves, a Dorco blade, forward diamond wire at a thickness of 0.04mm, a feeler gauge, IPA in a flux dispenser bottle, an OCA glue removal tool, clean room wipes, a magic mat, a dust detection lamp, a Sam King lamination mold for iPhone XR or 11, an iPhone XR or 11 touchscreen digitizer and frame, a Nasan laminator, and finally, a Nasan debubbler. The guide will be separated into two main sections, cutting and laminating. In the first section, we'll be covering removing the outer frame and the safest way to do so without damaging the LCD. We'll show you how to cut through the touch and glass layer with a correct technique. And finally, we'll cover the best way to remove the OCA. Before we even start the cutting process, you'll want to assess the damage of your screen. If your screen is badly cracked, you want to tape it up with sellotape to make sure it's more stable. The next thing you're going to want to do is test the screen. Check if there are any issues and generally assess the damage. You're going to be looking for burns, colourful marks, bleeds or lines. It's worth noting that screens with these issues are still refurbishable, however you won't be able to remove any of these issues during the refurbishment process. We tend to avoid refurbishing any screens with these issues and stick to refurbishing screens that we can label as grade A. So, once you know that your screen is ready to refurbish, you can begin removing the outer frame. To start this process, you'll need to place it on a heated vacuum plate, which will hold the screen in place as you refurbish it. Set the machine to 70 degrees and wait for around 5 minutes to make sure the adhesive has been heated thoroughly. While the screen heats up, remove all of the screws around the frame. Before removing the frame, we'll first need to remove the back plate. You can start by cutting through the touch flex with a sharp blade. We're doing this because with XR and 11 screens, it's very difficult to save the touch layer. And because of this, we won't need the touch flex. Once you've cut through the flex, separate the two flexes so you can clearly see which is which. This will allow you to remove the back plate. Start by lifting the back plate up a little, then grab a screwdriver and press on the chip toward the bottom of the screen. We're doing this because underneath the back plate is the rest of the display flex, and by pressing on the chip, it avoids damaging the rest of the flex as we lift the back plate. Sometimes this flex is stuck to the back of the plate. Next, remove the camera bracket with some pliers or side cutters. Then cut through the frame from both sides and use your fingers to fold the frame back and away from the screen. If the frame snaps off, lever it off with the pliers again. Take your time pulling the frame away from the screen. As you're pulling, try and hold the frame level with the screen so you aren't adding any extra pressure to the glass. It's really important to be mindful of where the cracks are when removing the frame. If there are cracks on the edges of the screen, you'll need to be overly cautious when lifting the frame away from those areas. Lifting the frame straight up where a crack sits could cause the glass to be pushed up into the LCD, damaging it. Whenever you can, make sure you push outwards rather than upwards. You'll generally get a better feel for this the more times you refurbish a screen. You'll feel when the frame is giving you too much resistance that might potentially cause damage. Just try to be overly cautious wherever possible when you're first starting out. Once you reach the bottom of the screen, the frame should snap off fairly naturally as you fold it backwards. This moves us on to our next section, cutting the touch layer. The iPhone XR and 11 are made up of 5 major layers. Starting at the top of the screen is the glass layer, then comes the touch, after that is the polarizer, then the LCD layer. and finally, the backlight. And amongst these layers are layers of OCA which bond them together. The goal here is to cut through the glass and touch layer to separate the polarizer, LCD and backlight layer. It is possible to just cut through the glass layer to save the touch layer. However, in our experience, we found that the touch layer is fragile on the XR-11 models, and more often than not, it gets damaged while cutting. So we don't recommend saving it, as it can be time consuming, and if you damage the touch layer when cutting, you'll just need to cut through it again. Before cutting the screen, you'll need to remove the two glue lumps that are protruding out of the LCD where the flex cables were. If you don't remove these, it may cause the diamond wire to lift into the polarizer, damaging it. To cut the screen, you'll need diamond wire. We're using forward diamond wire at a thickness of 0.04mm. To get a good grip of the wire, hold the diamond wire reel in one hand and then start pulling wire from the reel and wrap the wire around your other hand a few times. Once it's tight and secure around your hand, hold the wire tight against both of your thumbs. To start cutting, you'll want to start from the top of the iPhone and cut each side individually. Don't try to cut from both sides at once, as there's a higher chance you'll cut through the polarizer and damage the LCD. If you cut from either side first, you'll get a clearer view of where to cut before cutting the rest of the screen. You'll want to start by cutting between the touch layer and the polarizer. You can identify this layer by the gold edge. It's important to make sure you're cutting at the right height. Once you've cut 4 or 5 centimeters through each side, join the wire on the other side of the screen. Now you can cut through the rest of the screen. Cut at a 45-degree angle, switching continuously between cutting from the right and then the left. When you get to the bottom, draw an imaginary line with your eyes as to how far down you need to cut before reaching the display flex. Go as far down to the bottom as you can. It may take 2 or 3 passes to lift the LCD panel. When you feel like you've reached the bottom, you can try wiggling the top of the screen and removing the polarizer, LCD and backlight from the glass and touch layer. That's everything for the cutting process, which moves us on to cleaning the LCD. Before moving on, give the screen a quick test to see if it's been damaged during the cutting process. Once you're happy, with the vacuum machine still at 70 degrees, place the LCD layer on the heat plate with the flex bent over the edge. To remove the OCA, you'll need to use a glue removal tool and run it back and forth across the screen until all of the OCA has been removed. To use this tool correctly, make sure you hold the rod as flat against the screen as possible. Holding it at a higher angle could risk damaging the screen. You'll also need to switch between the 2 direction modes from clockwise to anti-clockwise, depending on how the OCA is resting on the screen. Once you've removed as much as you can with the removal tool, clean the excess with IPA, making sure you apply the IPA to the cloth or magic sponge and not directly to the screen. Sometimes after cutting, you'll get small pressure marks. Don't worry about these too much, as they usually go away after laminating and being in a vacuum chamber. However, if the mark is right on the edge of the display, this could be more problematic. If the screen hasn't already cracked, it most probably will when repressurized, as the edge is the weakest part of the screen. Okay, so now you've finished the cutting, let's move on to the laminating. You'll be finishing the refurbishment process by applying a fresh digitizer to your cut screen. The process is pretty much the same for all iPhone models, so you won't need to worry about learning the lamination process for each model. In this section, we'll be covering cleaning your freshly cut screen and making sure it's as dust-free as possible, applying your new digitizer, laminating with a Nissan lamination machine, and finally, debubbling the screen. Starting of course with the cleaning process. For this step, we're using a clean room. Clean rooms are designed to mitigate dust, which is what you're going to want to do when creating a refurbished screen. However, most people won't have space for one of these, so as an alternative, you can use a clean room box or laminar hood. Start by cleaning the screen with clean room wipes underneath the dust detection lamp, and make sure there's no visible dust. These lamps are designed to help you easily see any dust particles, scratches, or contaminants on the screen. With the cleaning done, it's time to apply the new top glass and digitizer with frame. Put the screen in an alignment mold and make sure it sits flat and give it one more quick clean. Get yourself a new digitizer and remove the digitizer's OCA plastic backing sheet. Press down into the mold and it will pinch the middle of the touchscreen and LCD layer together and begin the bonding process. With the digitizer applied, it's time to laminate. To fully bond the digitizer to the LCD, you have to use a lamination machine. This applies even pressure across the screen and bonds the digitizer to the LCD. Simply put the digitizer in the middle of the lamination machine, and once you turn it on, you'll see the screen bond to the digitizer. The final step in the whole lamination process is to put the screen into a debubbler. This is a pressure pod which applies pressure and helps remove any bubbles in the screen. Before moving on to the next step, you should give your screen a test after the lamination process to make sure everything is working correctly. And that's it. That's the entire refurbishment process for an iPhone X or XS. I hope you found this guide helpful. And as always, if you have any questions or if you'd like to see more refurbishment videos like this from us, then let us know in the comments below.